Chapter 2. The Digestion of Recursion. The stone, the tree, the beaver, the van, oh, the will of man. Section 1. The sky stretched open like a living gradient, a vast orchestration of color shifting between the deepening hues of indigo and firelit gold. The sun had begun its descent, but had not yet surrendered to dusk, casting everything in a surreal spectrum array of warm settlings. There was an energy to the air, something almost thick, almost knowing, an unseen rhythm pulsing in the atmosphere and within the surface of the world. Lamont Blue moved through it, walking past the school where children's laughter faded into the background of an ordinary afternoon. Their voices, bright and untamed, clashed against the stillness ahead. The place beyond the structure of roads and routines. It was there, past the edge of predictability, that the woods seemed to summon with the promise of a slight break from the constant motions of life's responsibilities. He stepped onto the abandoned path, the threshold where civilization frayed into untamed wild. It was not the kind of woods that had been walked through often, not by people at least. The leaves layered thick upon the ground, untouched by human steps, and the air smelled ancient but fresh, like the breath of something unmeasured. Oh shit! Lamont looks down in a jolt of instinct. A snake, possibly a cottonmouth or gardener's snake. Its head barely protruded from the 6-inch grass beside the path, its tongue flicking at the air. It wasn't crossing the trail, wasn't slithering, wasn't coiled to strike. It simply watched. He exhaled, shaking off the brief startled pause in his movement, and continued forward. At last, he stopped at the stone. It stood there, half buried in the earth like an ancient tooth, massive but natural, untouched by human interference. It jutted from the hillside where the land split, a stream carving its way through the soil, creating a quiet divide between where he stood and the restless outside world. The rock was smooth, time-worn, yet unshaken, a presence more than an object. And within its surface, flecks of quartz shimmered, barely perceptible in the dimming light. It was like a natural quartz pride rock. He climbed onto it, the stone cool beneath his bare feet, grounding him in something older than history. He did not know why he sat, but he sat. He flicked it. In doing so, he cultivated the raw, elemental power of the pocket lighter he possessed. Watching the flame tremble in the soft, friendly evening blue breeze. Fire, water, earth, air, all here in a recursive dance which seemed to echo ancient paths, decided long ago. Lamont exhaled and turned his gaze to the tree before him. His eyes crossed intentionally, not from strain, not from conscious uncovery, but from some deep internal instinct beyond reason. It was more of a scientific curiosity, an experiment in perception more than anything. Lamont exhaled and turned his gaze to the tree before him. His eyes crossed intentionally, not from strain or habit, but as if stirred by a deep internal instinct beyond reason. He recalled a scientific video he'd recently watched about an inversion goggles experiment. In that study, subjects who normally see the world in its ordinary orientation put on goggles that flipped every image upside down. What was up became down, and what was down became up. For an entire week, their vision was completely inverted, forcing their brains to adapt to this new, surreal perspective. The light entering their eyes remained unchanged, yet the brain's interpretation of it was entirely reversed. And when the goggles were finally removed, their vision did not snap back instantly to normal. Instead, they continued to perceive the world as if it were still upside down, until gradually, their brains readapted to the natural order. This lingering inversion revealed just how fragile and malleable our perception truly is. What we consider normal is nothing more than the product of our brain's processing. Now, as he focused on the tree, its sturdy trunk appeared split into overlapping layers, each contour and shadow echoing that eerie, inverted imagery. The tree's form, fractured into a deliberate, recursive double image, seemed to reveal hidden depths and secret codes buried within its bark. In that moment, the tree was more than just wood and leaves. It was a symbol of the mutable nature of perception, a silent testament to the idea that what we see is only a point of deeper, unexplored mysteries. And in that fractured, layered vision lay the promise of profound, hidden truths waiting to be discovered. He strained them, forcing the branches into a fractured double image, then let them unfocus controllably. A convergence began, the two images fighting, pulling together, then overlapping, canceling one another out. And then, the shift. His vision flattened. The point of the tree where he focused became something else, something paradoxical. It was bending space, and light all curving around it. The contradiction was impossible, transparent, yet fully reflective. Lamont was not looking at a tree anymore. He was looking into something that did not belong. A sphere. It was not an object. It was a violation of space itself, a tear in his perception, a contradiction of front, back, left, and right, simultaneously reflecting the entire world in perfect recursion, a monoscopic singularity. Then things started to intensify. First, it was how the fireflies flickered around him, their tiny pulses of motion vibrating with a charge he had never before felt, but he could sense palatably. Not just see them, but sense them and their trajectories, as if their will to move had become tangible. Then, the unseen camouflaged frog. It erupted from its hidden perch in the undergrowth, leaping toward the exact spot where his vision was veered to lock in after sensing a buildup of the frog's will to leap there. The sensation deepened. There was an order to this, what was even there, because his eyes never moved from the sphere, but could see the whole movement of the world in its reflection, transparency. Then, the beaver. Lamont did not see it at first. He saw its intentions moving its body. Even though his gaze remained locked on the sphere, his perception twisted, tilting at an impossible angle. He was still looking forward, but also downward, toward the bending stream. The beaver's presence cut through everything else's essence being sensed. It was moving with a definite preferential intent. More than the fireflies, more than the frog. Its will was overwhelming, to say the least. And it was scheming. It was menacing, with close-up, thick, wet facial fur. There was something different about it. Something wrong. Its face was too expressive, too aware. Its eyes carried something nearly human, mischievous, calculating, Cheshire cat-like. The beaver looked like it was on its way to commit a crime. The sheer force of its presence knocked Lamont out of the perception. Instantly, the sphere was gone. The tree was just a tree. The world had snapped back into, wish I could say, a stable place. Although it was the familiar one, but something had changed. The air around him felt heavier, charged with something unanswerable, but he carried it with him as he moved, the memory refusing to dissipate. The woods, unchanged yet fundamentally different, watched him go. The moment had been written, inscribed into something deeper than thought, into the very structure of reality. He stepped out of the trees, back toward the world of structure and expectation. But something had shifted, and there was no unseeing it now. The street stretched before him, Not just empty, but emptied. The world, just moments ago filled with the sounds of rustling trees, distant traffic, and the murmurs of a neighborhood winding down, had fallen silent. The absence of noise was more than stillness. It was hollow, as if something had been stripped away, leaving only the residue of what once was. The air felt thick, like moving through warm water, yet there was no resistance, no weight, just an eerie suspension, as if he existed within a different viscosity of reality. Lamont walked, but with each step, the ground felt less certain, like the very act of moving was an agreement between him and the world, one that could be revoked at any moment. He was not lightheaded, not dizzy. This was something else, a distortion, a warping, a wooziness, not of the body, but of space itself. He inhaled, expecting crisp evening air, but instead, the breath felt like it was passing through something denser than oxygen, something unseen, something he was not meant to name. Then, a yank, more like an unseen force, not physical, not tangible, but undeniable. It wasn't a voice, wasn't an idea. It was a direction that existed outside of choice. His body reacted before his thoughts could form, and he turned. There it was, a gold van. With its dark, tinted windows, it rolled forward deliberately, almost as if it wasn't being driven, but rather moving of its own will. The headlights cut through the dimming light, illuminating nothing but the road ahead, nothing but the path it had already decided upon. It wasn't just the driver controlling it. The van itself seemed to be infused with intention, as though it knew its purpose, knew its trajectory, and was following a law beyond physics, beyond mechanics. And suddenly, he was flooded with questions. If motion was charge, if charge was will, if will could be sensed, then was every object infused with the will of the people who set it into motion? The van disappeared down the street, leaving the silence behind. The wooziness still clung to the air, but something else had settled in now, something sharper. The world remained still, too still. He forced his steps forward, toward home, toward normalcy. He didn't look back. Less than 6 seconds later, he was stepping into his residence. His breath was still unsteady, but he tried to shake it off, tried to fold himself back into the routine of things. He had things to do, real things to get done, people to see, and deals to make. His ASVAB was already taken. Now it was just a matter of waiting, of seeing if the numbers would align in his favor. He anticipated Air Force-level scores, hopefully. His dad always told him they had the best facilities and intellectuals. His college financial aid paperwork was also due soon, deadlines creeping closer, pressing into him with the same quiet inevitability as everything else. Life was moving forward. Time waits for no one, he thought to himself. And then, Lamont felt a weird sensation, and so he veered out the window. The tires, the tinted windows, the gold van. Again? It wasn't speeding. It wasn't stopping. It was just there. The same steady, deliberate pace, the same eerie smoothness to its movement. Like it wasn't just being driven, but following something deeper, something older than roads, older than choice. Lamont's stomach dropped. It was the exact same van. But this time, something was different. This time, he was inside his house. So how? It seemed as if the will of the driver and subsequently the van had a path layered and looped. A recursive beat within the information, written and read onto reality itself. He backed away from the window. The van kept going. It didn't stop, didn't hesitate, just followed its path, smooth, inevitable, disappearing down the same street as before. And just like before, gone. Lamont sat down at his desk, contemplating, calculating, and explaining away. I must be tripping or something. He needed to focus. He needed to ground himself in something real. The ASVAB results will be here soon. His financial aid deadline was closing in. The future was moving, whether or not he was ready. Lamont's father always said he had the will to never give up, and that's what inspired him the most about his son. But as he stared at the papers in front of him, he felt it again. Not the memory, not fear, the question. What in the world was that?